Good afternoon, everyone in London. I see we have some participants online. Good evening if it's evening where you are, or good morning if you are in the Americas somewhere. Sorry, we're starting a little bit late. People here in London are finalizing the chewing over lunch. But we now do have a pretty full room ready to get started. We have I think an interesting session here this early afternoon. My name is Niels, Holms-Nielsen. I'm a practice manager for a global unit within the World Bank that focuses on disaster risk reduction. And of course, early warning systems is a key piece of most disaster risk management systems and ought to be a key piece of all of them. This session will be focusing on, in a sense, inclusion, certainly focusing on the most vulnerable groups that, as I think most of you, if you've shown up here, are pretty well aware that anything that is exclusionary in regular society also plays in a very real way when it comes to early warning systems. And from where we're sitting at the World Bank, we focus on development. Our purposes is to help eradicate poverty. So we try to learn as much as we can how to enable that what we finance is more inclusive. And for that reason, we have partnered with the UCL. We will hear a bit from Dr. Fearnley about some of the work that she's been leading with a group of scholars from here. We try to use on our side that type of academic learning, understanding to enable us to do better. But of course, we have a hope that through our work, we then also enable others to do better. So that's just briefly where I'm sitting in this system. We're going to have a presentation, a keynote speech, I suppose we can call it, from Dr. Fearnley. I'll introduce her in a second. Then we're going to have a panel discussion. One of our panelists is online. I hope there will be some minutes for a few questions from the audience, either online or here in the room. Whether they will, that depends on how much our panelist speaks, basically. So we'll have to see if I can figure out how to manage that time. So I would like to ask the IT folks that I can't see the up there to play a video in a second. This video we're trying to have tried to put together to show from the ground, so in one of the places where we're working, some of the elements that one can try to think of in the context of early warning systems when one tries to be more inclusive. So play video, please.
I think I'm going to change the screen. Let me change the window.
Hi, it's with great pleasure that we share today the valuable outcomes and insights that resulted from a highly successful cruise initiative in Niger, which was implemented by the World Bank in collaboration with GFDRR and the World Meteorological Organization between 2018 and 2022. The project addressed Niger's most pressing challenges in the field of early warning system and hydrometeorological activities. Niger's most prevalent natural hazards are drought and floods. Against these challenges, the project offers crucial support to national agencies, empowering them to bolster their capacities in early warning systems and services. Improvements delivered through the project now mean the public is alerted effectively and well-coordinated aid efforts are better facilitated. The core of our achievement lies in the close synergies we developed with national and local counterparts. These relationships have been instrumental in building national hydrometeorological capacities and disseminating vital information to the public. Through these collaborations, we fortify national hydromet services frameworks, including by updating Niger National Strategic Plan and Investment Plan and reinforcing their standard operating procedures. These steps worked in harmony to ensure more impactful early warnings. Another pivotal aspect of this project has been the development of hydromet data for various cities across Niger. These maps are now invaluable tools for stakeholders in early warning systems, enabling them to comprehend and tackle natural hazards more effectively. By understanding potential hazards, their likelihood and impacts, proactive measures can be taken that mitigate risk, save lives, and reduce economic losses. One of our proudest accomplishments is our collaboration with grassroots civil society on the ground, particularly women. Over the course of the project, we trained over 600 women leaders in early warning and disaster risk and response, as well as to build community resilience. We have seen that this has multiplied beyond our expectations by empowering these women to initiate, act, and in turn empower their communities. This grassroots focus has yielded tangible, localized results, creating sustainable impact at the community level. Alongside local impact, technical assistance achieved under the Cruise Niger project has been essential in mobilizing additional investments, especially from the World Bank. In fact, activities delivered through the Cruise Niger project have supported the design of larger World Bank investments that target urban development, food security, and resilience. Lastly, I must emphasize that these achievements owe their existence to the successful partnerships between the World Bank, GFDRR, and the Cruise Initiative. The positive outcomes we've just shared extend beyond Niger to cruise projects worldwide. Thank you for your assistance.
So, with that little glimpse into a project reality in Niger, let's jump into the presentation, the main part of this session this afternoon. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Carina Fearnley, the Associate Professor of Science and Technology Studies and the founder and director of the Warning Research Centre at the University College London. Dr. Fearnley is an interdisciplinary researcher who draws on expertise around scientific uncertainty, risk, and complexity to improve natural hazard early warning systems. In collaboration, of course, with other colleagues from the university and with GFDRR's Inclusive Disaster Risk Management and Gender Equality Initiative and its Hydromet program, she has co-authored the recently released note on good practices and entry points for designing exclusive and accessible warning systems. And I will leave a bunch of small postcards with a QR code. So those of you who doesn't want to carry a heavy book, you can get that maybe from Dr. Fearnley. But if you just want the QR code scanned on your phone, you can do that. Without further ado, Dr. Fearnley, please go ahead.
Thank you so much and welcome to this session, starting off with a great video. So I am here to talk a little bit about this wonderful report that we worked with the World Bank on how we can enhance inclusivity in early warning systems. Now, I've deliberately put a picture up here to represent perhaps a classroom that we might see here in the UK or America, just to really highlight that when we think of inclusivity, we all often think about it being for someone else somewhere else. And actually it's here, you know, we have got someone in a wheelchair, but we've also perhaps got some children here who suffer from autism or ADHD, or someone who's new to the country and doesn't speak the language and comes from a different country and cultural background. So we have to think about inclusivity is an aspect that affects us everywhere, and it's really important that we consider that. So our task really was with GFDRR was to look at how we can enhance inclusivity. So we wanted to look at what are some of the key lessons that we've learned and what are the key actionable things that we can actually do to enhance this in a real practical sense of the word. And so what we did was a literature review around inclusivity of all the key literature, both academic and also in terms of documents produced by NGOs, UN entities, and other grey literature, as we call it. And we also did a number of interviews with folk across the World Bank and also a number of NGOs, as you can see here, and academics across a number of institutions to try and build as best as we can a good representative picture. So, Mahi al-Shamiliyat fi Animat al-Alejandri. That's my attempt at Islam. I'm very sorry for anyone that I have offended with this. But the idea is to say, what happens if you're presented with information? It's a critical moment. The fire drill's just gone off. Can you read this? No, it's not even, you know, a language that we understand. It's left to right. Yes, left to right. And so there's all sorts of different cultural aspects, not just about the language, but the way things are expressed as well, and the way certain terms are. So let me just magically translate that to you, which is looking at how, what is inclusivity in warning systems. So what we want to do is really make sure that when we have our warning systems in place, that they're actually effective, that they actually work, and that they work for everyone. So what do we mean by that? And it means covering people who have very different characteristics. So as we have in this list here, we have sex, gender, sexuality, age, race, ethnicity, caste, disabilities, whether that's physical, mental, or cognitive, religion, languages, different communication forms, and precarity. So those people who are detained, undocumented, homeless, or asylum status. And what's really important is we make sure we tailor our warnings to those different communities so that they can actually receive those warnings and understand what to do, and ideally also be able to take appropriate action. But of course, inclusivity works across just one characteristic. Many people have many characteristics. You may be a lady who is Black, who is a Muslim and has a mother who has very poor visible impairments and children who are physically disabled. So you're trying to consider the needs of all those different people and how you're going to manage it in a crisis. And this is called intersectional. And this makes it really difficult because we're not just tailoring it to one thing. People have usually several things that they have to consider and people that they have to care for and provide that information on. Now, inclusivity does matter, and it matters because it is part of part of the procedure of the Sendai framework to make sure that we substantially increase the availability of and access to multi-hazard early warning systems. So as part of that, that is about inclusivity so that everyone has that access. And of course, we have this early warning for all initiative, which is early warnings for all. So that should be for everyone, no matter what their needs are. So as we start to see, hopefully over the next few years, our warning systems coverage increasing, we need to make sure that as part of that expansion, that we also make sure that those warnings are inclusive and are reaching the right people. And I say the right people, which is the people who are the vulnerable, the people who are affected, however they may need that information. So when we design early warning systems, we need to make sure that they're inclusive. And part of this means it needs to be people-centered, which we've talked about today in terms of being able to empower people to make their own decisions, maybe design their own warning systems and what their responses might be, and making sure that they have appropriate, ramps if they've got physical disabilities or signs for those who are deaf, for example. We also have multi-hazard early warning systems. So we have to deal with multiple hazards happening at the same time. And this isn't just necessarily a natural hazard. We could have a human-made threat, or we could have conflict going on at the same time. So we're doing a multiple situation, which can also change people's needs and their intersectional requirements over time. So this is an even more challenging thing, it's changing over time. And then integrated, we need to bring the users, the different needs and capabilities of those users, whether it's institutional or public or local or international, together through a commonality in terms of either a process or a way of communicating with one another. And one attempt of doing that is having CAT messages, but then also being able to tailor those CAT messages to people who have specific needs. So we kind of need that kind of local standardization hybrid, which is incredibly difficult to actually achieve. So when we look at warning systems, quite often, and this is some research that Carina Garcia and myself produced quite a while ago now, and we looked at a number of different disasters that had happened and what had happened with the early warning systems and where the failures had been. And what we found was that it wasn't necessarily in the individual 4 elements or the 4 pillars as we see now in the early warning for all, but in the space in between. It was the things that linked these 4 elements. So this is effective communication networks, risk education, governance, trust, increased preparedness and awareness and trust, defining accountability and responsibility, and increasing participation. And so we found that these were the areas that really needed to be reinforced. So when we're designing inclusive warnings, if we can actually address a number of those central elements, then our warnings will be more enhanced. And as I said before, intersectional, making sure that people can see, hear, be able to receive and act on those warnings depending on their characteristics. So that can be quite an alarming sound to hear. And actually, for those of you joining the movie night tonight, and there's a session on nuclear later on, we actually spent a whole afternoon listening to sirens. It was actually quite terrifying at times. They can really instill that noise. But you can imagine if you're visually impaired, you're hearing this noise. These are the instructions given to you, but you can't quite read it. Perhaps you haven't got your glasses on you, or you're elderly and you haven't been able to get glasses. So then it's like, it's no good saying, well, here's the information on the paper, because clearly some people might not be able to hear it. That's what it looks like. Much better when we can actually see when we put our glasses on. And I guess this is just also to remind me to say that throughout the report, we have a number of case studies to illustrate these points, and I'll talk a little bit about them. But a really, really great one has been the National Cyclone Risk Management Project, where we've seen, a huge increase in inclusivity around warnings by building shelters, doing a stakeholder engagement with local communities, giving them sirens, building those shelters, giving the responsibility to the local communities so that when there was a cyclone coming, they could actually provide those warnings and evacuate in a very effective way. And I'll come back a little bit to that point a bit later. So also we have like technology that we can use. So this is a technology that's used for people who are deaf or have a loss of hearing. So you wouldn't be able to hear that siren, but you might see everyone running around the room frantically thinking, oh my God, what's happening? There's devices like this that have flashing lights. They do different colors, different kind of strobes and patterns to enable people who can't hear to establish what's going on. So how can we enhance our inclusivity in warnings? Well, there are a number of really fundamental key factors that we need to consider here. Firstly, warnings are long-term social processes. Warnings need to be embedded in societies, in communities, in different groups, whether that's like your local group and, church group or religious group, or like a group of people who may have same diseases or viruses or that you are living with, for example, and going through those needs and requirements. So it's really important that they are part and embedded in our society of every day. We also need to use multiple channels. Redundancy is absolutely critical for early warnings. We cannot just rely on one communication tool. It might fail. Sadly, technology can often fail at the critical point, and so we need to make sure that we've got backups. So I'm not saying that technology isn't important, it's critical, but we need to also have backups to relay that technology from different areas as well. So it's really important we have multiple channels. And also we need to make it relevant to everyone over different timeframes and spatial coverage. We also, to make it inclusive, need to connect all the different governance levels, including local, national and international. We need to integrate across all the different vulnerabilities and how they might respond to different types of hazards and sequences, or multiple hazards happening at the same time, or indeed cascading or compounding hazards. We also need to extend beyond the warning to be looking at what's happening when that event happens and what's the actions and the conditions that are required and the capacity of those to act. And also we need to facilitate early action and anticipatory action. So there's quite a lot of things that we need to do. So in the report, what we did was we broke it down, looked at the 4 different elements and then a sort of cohesive central part to look at what are the different varying entry points that can be entered in terms of how we can enhance and increase disaster risk knowledge, for example. So here what we talk about is, for disaster risk knowledge, we're looking at participatory approaches to data generation and weather information. And a really good example of that is the Daroja project, which we're going to be having a world premiere view of tonight at our warning film night. So come along and see more information about that. But it's a really great example of where we've got a situation where we want to build disaster risk knowledge, and that's not always feasible. We've got people who are coming from certain countries, certain situations that don't want to reveal their identity, certain information about their age or religion. They're concerned about this. So, you know, we also want as much data as possible to be able to help process how we can best serve the people that we're trying to. But actually, in reality, sometimes that data is just not going to be feasible, and that makes it really, really challenging. So what we did was we created a table for each of these with gaps and actions. So we sort of identified real key things here. So no or limited understanding of specific needs or capabilities of vulnerable groups. And therefore we need to increase the share of women as heads of community early warning communities. It's one concrete thing that we can actually do to enhance that. So how do we implement? We then looked at detection, observation, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting. And here we think that really the entry point is around diversity, collaboration, and commitment. And I've got a project here, Diegos Provera de Agua, trying to cover as many languages as I can today. I'm not really a linguist though, where citizen scientists, actually people who are living in the area, are able to input their own data and relay that as part of this database, where you can see here looking at reported flood-related activity. Another really good example is the Fiji Women's Weather Watch, where after a number of different storms across Fiji, and women were left out of the narrative and were badly impacted by the storms, said we wanted to be able to get that warning and be able to act on it to look after the people that we care for. So they were then working together. They created the Women's Weather Watch, works with the local meteorological organisation, and they provide information over a radio to all the local communities. It's been so successful that they've gone on to have community meetings, share all sorts of types of hazard and risk communication, and they've kind of moved beyond radio to other forms of communication as well. So again, here we have another table that illustrates our gaps and actions. So how to implement warning, dissemination, and communication. So here we think the key entry points are to communicate redundancy, adaptivity, and creativity. So important, something that we're trying to focus on in this conference, creativity, creating. And here I've got a little video here of how in Haiti, the communities worked together to try and create a video to raise awareness to the local communities around what to do if we get a warning. And it was really done to try and attract the attention of those local communities and people in a way that's perhaps a little bit more interesting than just a document. So let's have a little look at this video. So there we go. Wonderful video there by the Haiti Directorate of Civil Protection producing this video. And we all know the power of a song in terms of us being able to remember the lyrics and remember the actions. For example, if I was to start playing Hey Macarena right now, you would all be getting up and doing the actions and being in a chain, right? I wouldn't be able to stop you. So, it's a really powerful tool, and that's some of the work that obviously Pablo is working on, is how we can actually use these tools to our advantage. So again, here we've got a summary table here with some entry points, which please do read from the report. So the final element really is the preparedness and the response capacity. So this is about enhancing early warning systems by building on national and local systems. So this really comes back to that idea of Bangladesh and the warning, cyclone warnings there, where they've worked incredibly hard to not only implement women leaders as identified, but also train up local communities of all different genders, so that everyone is able to respond to this and understand how to respond. And indeed, as part of this, it's also about making facilities, so this is user-friendly. So there's obviously many of them have ramps so that you can actually gain access. But it seems a bit of a shame to invest so much money in a cyclone shelter that only gets used as a cyclone shelter every now and then. So increasingly we're seeing like this great example here in Bangladesh, which is actually used as a school, and it has a health facility during peace times, as we say, and then when there's a cyclone it then becomes more of a shelter. But it does mean that the school children can still go to school, there's still health facilities, there's a doctor, and there's other spaces. So it really is not only just providing an emergency shelter, it is really enhancing the quality of life of those people and making sure that space is used and maintained. So that's really wonderful. So again, we have that table, which is really a lot of details here, but the examples I've kind of really illustrated that. So finally, this is like a summary of the entry points of all those 4 key elements. And through those, hopefully we can address that central key element in the middle of our warning elements. So to summarize, what we really want to do is to make sure that we engage diverse communities and stakeholders from the beginning. And this means we need to finance continual engagement processes for people and organisations so that they can identify and fulfil their own warning needs. We need to integrate iteration and adaptive learning, because things change over time and space. And so we need to make sure we build, maintain and develop and continue to have trust and capabilities for those long, not just short-term warnings, but also longer-term warnings on a daily level. And then we also need to support initiatives and activities that create an enabling environment. So that means establishing good practices, entry points, comparable data, making sure that data is kept in a safe and confidential way, and that we can also transfer and scale different methods and approaches. What we can say is that evidence shows that taking practical approaches to inclusion in warnings has better outcomes, and it reaches more than one. So it's a really great thing that we can do to make sure that what we do with our warnings goes further. So we'd like to thank the World Bank team here who worked with us to produce this report. And as I said, it was funded by the Global Facility for Disaster Risk Reduction and Recovery by the UN. And this is some of the authors here. Please, I will share a link on social media. Please do have a look at the report. And if you have any questions, do let us know. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fearnley. Great presentation, quick overview. There's much more in the report, of course. Now I would like to invite our panelists to come up and take a chair, unless you are Anna Maria Bogdanova. She's a colleague of mine. She's probably sitting down already. Please come and I'll introduce you. Anna Maria, she's, I don't know if we get Anna Maria on the screen. She's connecting online.
Yes, I'm connected. I don't know if you can hear me.
We hear you very well, Anna Maria. We can't see you yet, but we'll try to get your picture up on the screen. Anna Maria, she's a disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank and currently working covering the Latin America and the Caribbean region. We have here with us Maria Campuzano Perez, Gender and Disaster Risk Reduction Specialist with UNWomen. We have Rahel Ahmed, climate change policy advisor at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And then we have John Harding over there. John is the head of the Climate Risk and Early Warning System Secretariat, also known as the CRUISE. All right, first off, I would like to ask each of you, maybe we start with Ana Maria online and then we go to Maria, John and Rahel. If you could briefly, very briefly, tell us a bit about your experience designing and implementing inclusive early warning systems. Ana Maria.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks a lot for bringing me into this event. I would like to say huge words of appreciation to the participants and organizers, to GFDRR, to University College London for championing this topic through research, discussion, and practice. So in the Caribbean region where I had some experience, the inclusive and accessible early warning systems are paramount for life and safety of people. Like everywhere else, the systems are needed not just for people to be aware of the risks, but to serve as mechanisms of efficient preparedness and response. So what we've witnessed over the past years is that the region has really increased its focus on developing early warning systems in a comprehensive and sustainable manner. The region has really transformed from, let's say, a technical view on early warning systems towards a more comprehensive and inclusive approach. There is a growing interest towards multi-hazard impact-based early warning systems and their regional mechanisms to coordinate between multiple stakeholders. There is a gender-sensitive model national legislation, and the strong regional institutions. International investments are growing over the past years and will continue to grow with new global initiatives. But with all that, the challenges are still surpassing many of these efforts. And the part of the Cruise Caribbean project that I was leading in the region was to collaborate with regional meteorological DRM agencies, development partners such as World Meteorological Organizations, UNWomen, to better understand and articulate, to help the region to better understand and articulate the impact of natural hazards and setting up some sort of guiding principles that could help the region to strengthen their multi-hazard early warning systems. In this process, we often refer to the term of people-centered, but what it actually means is inclusive and self-sustaining regional impact-based multi-hazard early warning system. Under the project, we prepared a regional roadmap. We advocated for establishing national processes for systematically applying impact-based forecasting to advance community-based early warning action planning and implementation. There were a myriads of events that took place building capacity of communities, involving private sector, involving gender bureaus. So it was a lot of very interactive activities integrated in this project, and I'm actually happy that John is also on the panel. I think he'll be proud to hear that, because the whole project was done under the Cruise initiative.
Thank you, Masha. Maria, could you elaborate, or could you tell us a bit about UNWomen's work in the inclusive early warning system space? And I think that little black thing is a microphone.
Yeah, I think it works. Okay. Hello. So the work of UNWomen in this area comes from a large area of research that shows that women are disproportionately impacted and put at higher risk because they're not covered by early warning systems, and if they are, it's not timely and it's not effective and it's not working for them. Over half of the countries globally don't have working early warning systems, and in this context, the main challenge for inclusive disaster risk reduction and early warning systems for women especially are barriers to engagement, to be part of that process, and also a lack of coordination among stakeholders that might not be aware of the importance of the gender dimensions of risk. So what UNWomen does is that we try to ensure targeted action that enhances this collaboration, and it brings non-traditional DRR actors together with the traditional DRR actors and sits them together at a table so that they can figure out how to work together. So over the past 4 or 5 years, UNWomen has worked in 61 countries, covering over
170 million people, and working together with governments and over 100 women's organizations to make this happen and to make gender responsive disaster risk reduction I think that is possible. So we do this through the Women's Resilience to Disasters Gender Equality Accelerator, like the program, which is UNWomen's Gender Equality Accelerator. What we do is that we work on building that enabling environment for women to be able to be part of this, and also to make sure that they have access to all the services that they traditionally excluded from. And then very recently, we also joined the advisory panel for the Early Ones for All initiative, and in that we are gonna, we will be working with our existing partners and our existing activities to make sure that gender equality and women's empowerment considerations are part of the Early Ones for All initiative, to make sure that everyone is covered by 2027.
Thank you, Maria. John, Cruz perspective on inclusion.
Thank you, Neil, and good afternoon, colleagues. So I'll just give a bit of a perspective from the financing mechanism on how we address inclusion. And the short answer is typically it's not easy for us to address this across our portfolio of projects. That doesn't, I mean, obviously you heard from Masha, who was leading with her team the program in the Caribbean. When there's a lot of very nice and successful examples we can reflect to, but if you look across our portfolio of programs, we're nowhere close to having the right level of inclusion, of inclusivity in our the systems, the early warning systems that we develop. And I mean, to understand that obviously, as if we're a financing mechanism, with development financing mechanism, we respond primarily to the demands of the countries. If they identify this as a priority in our discussions with them, then this will get more attention. But for different, it could be political, social, cultural reasons, this is not always the case in some of our discussions with some of the countries where we'll be initiating these discussions with. And and that's why when we talk about development, we have principles of good development. We prescribe environmental and social standards across. And in the same way, we have a similar approach when we talk about our early warning work. We like to have some principles that we'd like to see systematically addressed across our portfolio. It can be gender sensitive programming, certainly have people-centered approaches or another. So in a way, I won't go into the technicalities of how we're set up, but we're fortunate that we're called an intermediary fund. So actually the work is led by technical institutions who have a lot of this expertise and knowledge and principles already within their operational engagement with the countries. So the World Bank is one of them that you've heard of today, the WMO and then UNDRR or others. So we rely mostly on their modalities of engagement and their principles for engaging countries. It does happen that if there's some areas where we feel there's not enough evidence of progress, the financing partners, so the countries who finance that, may ask for a little bit, a bit more accountability on how some of these issues are being addressed. And that's happened in our case. So I have one of my financing partners who's sitting just on my right now. And actually chairs the board right now, so I'll be careful. But they'll say, okay, we would like to see more gender-sensitive programs in the portfolio, and would like to hold you to account and get to report on that. Obviously, we prefer not to do too much of that because that's, in a way, it can be as a conditionality, it's additional work, and so on. But that's what is actually required sometimes if we really want to push some of these agendas forward across our portfolio. So I'll stop here, just to give you a perspective from a financing side. Thanks
a lot, John. That makes it easy to pass it on to Rahel, since you can tell us what rules you are imposing on John. Please give us your perspective on how you guys, from a bilateral point of view, approach the issue of inclusivity.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thank you so much for hosting this, and just to say that the last couple of days have been really, really great. So thanks to UCL for putting this together. So talk a little bit about the experience of FCDO. So we do approach and see early warning systems as a way to prevent, address and anticipate the impacts from climate change, and also to build resilience in communities. So a few of the programs I'm looking at, Nairi and our Met Office colleagues there. So WISER is a program that's looking to increase the capacity of Met services and climate centres in Africa, Asia Pacific, and the Middle East and North Africa. We also have research-specific programs looking at risk assessments and other kind of practical instruments to support early warning and earlier response in both the humanitarian and development contexts as well. And of course, as well, supporting crews and REAP as well, that we've heard a lot about. And that's part of the UK's dual approach of trying to build that political commitment around early warning and early action, but then also supporting programs at the local and country level as well. And we've heard a lot about the need to connect early warning and early action, and which needs that collaboration across the humanitarian, development and climate sectors. And we always talk about needing to break down the silos. And this is something as well that, as you all know, it does happen in government as well. The portfolio sits across multiple different ministries, departments. Like, so in the UK, it's from the Health Agency, FCDO, Cabinet Office. And so we are trying to be intentional in working together across the whole system and making sure that there is best use of each part, and we're talking together as much as possible. So I think I will stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, I'll turn back to you, Masha. We heard from Carina a number of the challenges involved in inclusivity when it comes to early warning systems. I would like to ask you if you could speak to us a bit about some enabling factors you would have come across, or you might have come across in the course of your work as a World Bank or help finance some of these systems and promote inclusivity in the course of that work.
Yeah, sure. Actually, one of the things while we're watching the presentation of Carina and with the video from Haiti, I couldn't stop but thinking that if I was in Haiti at this moment, I probably would be in trouble, because with the cheerful music, I would be thinking if it's actually alerting me of something dangerous coming, or if it's sort of like a celebration. So it can get tricky for people without a language, and that's a part of the challenging context that we actually have in the Caribbean, because in the Caribbean you have it all. You have multiple languages, you have cultures, you have issues with interagency collaboration, socioeconomic disparity. Not to pile up on challenges, but I cannot not say it, but the budget is still a limiting factor. And when the country has a clear choice between investing in infrastructure or investing in public awareness, very often public awareness is not going to end up in the priority list. So that does put a challenge on things that we say that is needed for inclusive system, like education program, awareness campaigns, community outreach. So one of the sort of things that we kind of we're trying, at least through our projects, through our programs, is to try to shift the focus to include as much as possible of this kind of soft component, but obviously more needs to be done. Data limitation is a problem, and it's kind of for the whole early warning system to work, you need to have a good accurate information. So the fact that in the Caribbean, for example, we've identified a very significant shortage of hydrological data is a big limiting factor for early warning system development in general. And for example, through the Cruise Caribbean project, we were trying to see that, okay, we cannot produce new data, but we have some data already available. So how can we put them all together in a comprehensive platform and inject it into the early warning system? So that was a big push under the project that was very well received in the region. But what we've learned in this process, and probably it's one of the kind of enabling factor, is how we treat the definition of vulnerability and how we interpret it. So vulnerability is not something static, it's pretty fluid, it can change from day to day, from hour to hour, it's highly localized, and family living on the higher grounds will have a quite different vulnerability profile than the family living in the lower part of the settlement for flood risk, for example. So can we design an early warning system that would take all of these factors into account? It's very challenging, but we can do our best to incorporate these principles and approaches and trying to make it a bit more flexible. And we can do it through community outreach that can be supported. The work of gender bureaus can be supported. Educational projects for the communities should be supported. We talked, I think Carina mentioned about representations. That's a part that is essentially needed, that we need not just representation, but a decision-making process with the participation of vulnerable groups can be supported and should be supported, and including through the bank projects. There is space to involve communities in co-design and co-production of inclusive elements of early warning system. And I think the report mentions it, that they give everyone a voice for action. I think I kind of remember that phrase from the report. And I think this is what we should be looking at. Yeah, so kind of, I probably will stop here, but there's clearly more things that we can keep adding to this solution thinking.
Everybody a voice for action. Sounds simple enough. John, how do we do that? You can interpret that question in a broader context, unless you have the answer, of course.
No, I don't have an answer, but I do see some aspects that can. Sorry, thanks. Apologies for those online. There are some aspects there on how to. If we look across our popular programs and we collect good practices, there are some things that are come across very importantly, and one is not to address this issue of inclusiveness as an afterthought. It has to be, from the moment you start working with a country or government institutions on a new type of service, a new early warning system of any type, from the very early stages, you have to bring this criteria into consideration. We literally had one of our successful, well, so-called successful projects. We're working in a country in the Pacific, I won't say which one, working with the meteorological services there, bringing in a new capacity to predict seasonal forecasts. And it was the first time they were able to provide drought advisories, and they built up a whole system, and the capacity in the Met Service, it was owned by, and really, really nice. And then the project, ticked everything, and then they said, if you could have some additional financing, because we'd like now to work on the outreach and how we can get this information out to the agricultural, the users of that information, so on. And so that's a national operational reality of what we see. But what we on the other end of that spectrum, and if you look at and I hope you realize from the work that the GFDRR and Carina with the Centre have been doing here, the commitment of the World Bank to this. In West Africa, across our portfolio of projects, from the very early stage of the programs, women groups were brought into the discussion, and women leaders, and throughout the countries where we were working. And I have to say, the value of that is not just for the meteorological or national disaster management organizations to understand what type of information they require. I really like the way Carina mentioned that there are really multiple benefits that you then see across the whole project. So there's a much stronger ownership of the products. Whatever service you're going to develop is going to be then used and applied. And so I mean, bringing that into the early stages of the discussion, I think is certainly one of the aspects I think does make a big difference.
Thanks, John. Sorry for throwing your curveball with my question. But you mentioned women's group and the importance of bringing a women group in early in the process. That, of course, Maria is well placed to talk about. Maybe you can elaborate a bit about how to do that from the experience and extend to other local groups, if you will, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to try to expand on what John said. So the success of any early warning system relies on the trust and the connection that exists between that system and the community that it serves, right? So by engaging the women groups and people that know and are connected to that community from the inception phase and across the whole life cycle of a system, that means that it's going to have community ownership, it's going to be sustainable, and that's what a successful early warning system is. So by incorporating women's knowledge, by incorporating traditional knowledge as well, and just local experiences into this information, that means that it can be translated not only into local languages, but also it can be translated from this very technical, very sciencey based information into actual easy to understand things that people can do and they can act upon. And that means that people can contextualize that information and they can take practical action from that. And that, like, it reminds me of the session that we were in the other lecture theatre earlier, how we then turn those warnings into action, right? So that obviously has to be supported and funded at the policy level and in the way that we allocate budgets, because this does not happen magically. And it also, like, at that level, we also have to incorporate the decision making to make sure that that decision making includes women and includes community leaders and other very important people that should be there and whose needs have not traditionally been addressed in these spaces. So just giving a bit of a stat here, so 0.01% of worldwide funding goes to projects that address both climate change and women's rights, 0.01%. That is absolutely nothing. And it's silly because the tapping into these very well-established and wealth of knowledge that exist in communities already and that are already happening, and all the initiatives and efforts that are happening at a local level saves so much time and resources, and it makes sure that those people know what the people in their communities need. They will know what communication channel works best at what time of the day and how their communities operate. So not only that allows information to get across more effectively, but also it allows this two-way communication mechanism that exists for communities themselves to also feed back into this early warning system and feed back information that is also very valuable in terms of assessing the post-disaster needs assessment. And how we make those assessments at the end. I'm thinking specifically of sex, age, and disability segregated data, which is such a big challenge when it comes in the post-disaster phase to really understand what needs to happen for that community to recover.
Thank you very much. Part of, I think, that intervention refers to the relevance of the system and the importance of inclusion for relevance. I was wondering, really, if I could ask you to expand a bit on the relevance perspective. What have you seen in your work that makes stuff more relevant related to early warning systems?
Yeah, I think this builds a lot on what was already being said around the timing of it. So, a lot of this learning comes from the WISER program, and one of the ways that you can make sure it is relevant is a more kind of immersive form of co-production, which is really important. So, communities, we talk about communities needing to be involved at all stages, right from the beginning to the development and the implementation. But this engagement has to be ongoing, and it has to go beyond the consulting at the start and at the end of the project. And it has to also include all the different stakeholders and all the actors, so the users, the decision makers, the producers, and it is time intensive. And a lot of the time we sign off on projects and they need to have been implemented like 3 months ago. So that's not really gonna work, and it's not gonna make it relevant. There also needs to be enough of a budget. You need to look at the budget, and are there enough resources to make sure that all the different actors are able to engage fully in the process? And I'm sure a lot of you have been part of projects that haven't been so flexible. So there's the sign off, and then that is it, you have to implement it. as it is, but without that flexibility, how are you able to incorporate the changes in situation, in context, and also feedback from the communities? So like I said, it is resource intensive, but without genuine co-production, it's going to be really, really hard to make sure that it's relevant for the communities. And I think you could have mentioned earlier in the session in the morning, like, it doesn't matter how much tech or money there is behind it, without that engagement, it's not gonna do what you want it or everyone wants it to do. So I was gonna talk a little bit about the Daraja project that was mentioned in the presentation earlier, and that there's also going to be a film later on. So I won't go into too much detail of that, as we've already heard about, and we'll hear a bit more later. But one of the key parts and why that's been successful is the way that the warnings have been sent to the communities. It means that it does allow for early and anticipatory action. And it can be things very simple, like getting the community together to clear out the drains there isn't blockages and doesn't result in flooding. But something else that also we've been talking about the last couple of days is, what are some of the reasons why people aren't able to take the actions? And we've talked a lot about trust and misinformation, the formats that the warnings are provided in. And I really liked yesterday Lisa Robinson's phrase from BBC Media Action of spray and pray, which is not which is not going to allow us to do what we want to do. People don't have the means or don't know how or where it is, for example, it's safe for them to go. And also maybe some people just don't want to leave their homes or don't want to leave their belongings. But all these things, unless you have genuine co-production, then you're not going to be able to address these issues. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Masha, maybe you can dig a bit further into this link between the warning and the response. Can you share just a few thoughts? We are carrying on the arriving late from lunch, so really just a few thoughts so we get maybe 1 or 2 questions in the room afterwards.
Yeah, no, I think a lot has been summarized already, but maybe just a couple of kind of not additional aspects, but just to highlight. So the problem is that, you know, it's not an exact science, like, so it's very anecdotal, and the connection between, like, making it inclusive and accessible, you know, there's a recipe, you make it inclusive in one place, but it doesn't mean that it's going to work in the other one. So we don't have like this list of ingredients, and if we follow the recipe, we're going to end up with a perfect cake. No. So it has to be very flexible and adjustable. But one thing that we know that makes a lot of difference, and the one thing that leads to more efficient response, is a clear understanding of impact. So we say impact, but we need to make sure that we use the right words for this. So we need to work with even the Met officers, with DRM services, to make sure that the way we communicate the message, the way the message is communicated, changes the perception, and it will change the way people would respond. So if you, I don't know, if you say that there's a 15% chances of rain and landslide, the response is going to be quite different if you say, like, there's a 15% chances that your life is in danger because of the landslide. So we need to keep emphasizing the impact and to make sure that we use the right words for this. This has been done, like, part of it we've been trying to push through the Caribbean project together with UNWomen and UNWRR, when we were training operational staff to find better ways to communicate impact. Focus on action is clearly something that we need to keep drilling on, and importance of feedback loops. I think somebody already mentioned it before. I think Maria might have mentioned it before, but I don't think we do enough for this for multiple reasons. I think our projects are not long enough to have the system, tried and tested and see how we can actually improve by using the feedback from the communities. And if we need to probably to rethink where do we start and how we start our projects, right? Like focusing more on the end users, on the communities, on the actual actions and what needs to be done for this, and kind of go backwards to like what are the system requirements, what are the institutional requirements, where is the chain broken between all these elements of early warning system. So just this couple of thoughts, but there are more. But I think those 2-3 points, they really showed us that they can make a lot of difference.
Thanks, Masha. Maria, I want to get to you with one question that I imagine has an endless amount of answers, but nevertheless, do you see or have you come across opportunities where beyond the importance of addressing exclusivity with inclusivity, that there might be a chance related to the early warning system work to even address some of the underlying socioeconomic vulnerabilities or maybe even socioeconomic exclusions that exist?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief, even though it is a very long-winded answer. So our experience and our work has shown that truly for that to happen, there needs to be a whole of society approach. And I believe that's true for like effective disaster risk reduction in general. And that whole of society approach support for women's leadership and for resilience building is essential for that addressing other social inequalities. And we have seen from our work how this multiplier effect happens in terms of gender equality and women's empowerment at all levels when women are involved in early warning system designs, when they're involved in just leading how they work. Most of that happens because of this linkage of information that they gain and kind of what that means and how that shapes their position within their community. So it's almost like this marriage of knowledge, of the knowledge that they have from being part of this community, from having this traditional knowledge or ancestral knowledge that they carry just by nature of being part of that community and for their role in that community. And marrying in with this very technical knowledge that comes with the what you need to establish an early warning system. So that results in increased confidence, and that increased confidence and that new positionality in the community then leads to a shift in discriminatory social norms that would have traditionally lead them out of this conversation. And we've seen the ripple effects of this in Vanuatu. There's a women-led early warning system, and some of the women there have run for local office. They have made demands at Parliament, and that is just like, it's giving them the trust that they can trust in their capacities to then go and share that and advocate for themselves and for their communities. So I think that shows that how this involvement and whole society approach and inclusion of everyone into the systems can then have further impacts. And it shows that investing in the capacities and the knowledge of women that is often very under-resourced and under-recognized will have long-term success.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for that example from Vanuatu. I think we have authority to go a few minutes over, I was told. Anyone, I would like to ask in the room if there's anyone with a question to any of the panelists, to Dr. Fearnley. And then I know I'm supposed to look at the chat. I'm not sure how I do that, but maybe I can get some help from someone with the IT. You have a question, I believe. Can you briefly tell who you are and then ask the question? Thanks. Oh, you need the mic. So. Anyway, I don't mind that.
Okay. Andrew Tupper, I'm a freelance consultant. My question's around metrics in inclusive warnings. So there's always that tension with a short-term project and worthy, wonderful projects, but it can be hard to track progress, and it can be hard to sort of see people, have people see the whole journey and and believe in the long-term journey. Is there work that we need to do to improve our metrics, our ability to measure how inclusive our warnings are?
I was going to say yes. I was just going to answer yes. But yeah, very obviously. But, I'll let UNWomen.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like that's something that we also struggle with, and how we measure that, and especially because of the lack of sex agents' ability to segregate data in national databases. And it's a huge undertaking getting everyone involved in getting this data and collecting it and seeing the relevance of it, not just for early warning systems, but also DR and when it comes to disaster response as well. That's all you need to know, what the needs are and who is in need of help. But yeah, I don't know. I think I don't have the answer, but I think a way of approaching it is thinking on what information you need and kind of how you are going to measure the impact of those early warning systems on everyone, and how you address those very niche, very nuanced situations, and it's very context based. So there's no one size fits all.
Thanks, and I think because I just went through that, and Rahel will be very aware of these discussions we have to show we've got operational procedures and how do we address gender sensitivity across our portfolio of projects, and as part of that we have to show metrics on how effective we have been, and you know it is challenging. So obviously we can count and not know, we can disaggregate exactly as you said by gender, how many people benefit from certain types of training, certain types of capacity, took part in certain types of consultations. So that would be an obvious one. We also ask our technical partners to actually report on how much money they actually spent on some of these aspects. So to actually demonstrate a value to that commitment, and obviously then as part of the overall. So those are two of the metrics that we currently use. But obviously, it would be ideal if we could actually show at a more on the results stage, you know, on the access side and all that. But that currently we don't measure that.
Hi, this is Claudia from the UCL Warning Center. So I'm just monitoring the online people. First of all, just wanted to say that there's been some positive comments of thank you so much for the pertinent discussion points. So worth acknowledging that. There's been a couple questions, but I think one that was quite interesting was the following. We are at the dawn of the big data era. Could we explore fundamental transformation of data collection? How can we build early warning systems that put people at the center of data? How can we build more timely and needs responsive decision support systems by mining social media, building two-way multi-hazard info systems, and amp up engagement with local disaster teams for trusted crowdsourcing? Easy one. Do
you have a view on that, John? I always have a view on that, Niels, as you know. Yeah, no, obviously, I do that. I like using sometimes the example of the country where I live in rather than the country I work in. I currently live in Geneva, in Switzerland, with my function. And so 2 years ago, Switzerland moved from a siren-based early warning system to a more modern cell phone based application system. So it's only 2 years ago that a country with a technology like Switzerland made that shift, and that's sort of so they are making the shift. It takes time, even in some countries which have more capacity. Interestingly, to point out that the dynamics behind that was actually the lobbying by the groups of people who are hearing impaired, as you'd expect from so they were finally successful in making that shift towards a more advanced technology. But otherwise, of course, yeah, across our programs, if there's kind of technologies, you saw the thing from Niger. So we never work in isolation. And there were other World Bank projects in Niger where they were using cell phone crowdsourcing data from where they can go house to house with the cell phone, identify the low-lying buildings that are more flood risk. It was part of a larger flood risk resilience program, the World Bank. And of course, that data becomes invaluable for the work we were doing in making sure that we can identify who are the communities that can benefit, who need to receive those warnings and that information. So those are the kinds of, if it's well built up, those technologies can really make a difference across some of the programs we're working.
All right, let's see a good interest in the room. Why don't you go first? I saw your hand shoot up, and then we'll see if we can make the whole circle go up there afterwards. Go ahead, introduce yourself briefly so they know who you are and address the question to someone, if you will.
Okay, I'm Josephine Mahoney. I work actually in satellite data, so this is actually a personal interest question. So, I mean, it's been really enlightening what you've been talking about, and it seems like you're very much talking about how early warning, building inclusive warning systems through community groups is almost investing in social infrastructure. And I sort of lived through the pandemic here in the UK, and I thought that the pandemic really exposed how a lot of, when warning systems are not socially inclusive, a lot of things can go wrong. And so I'm interested in whether you guys, with your diverse knowledge from around the world, sort of have any observations from the pandemic about how maybe systems that were built up to be socially inclusive warning systems for natural hazards, whether there was a way that was flexibly used in a pandemic situation, or whether this sort of, if you've sort of built up an inclusive warning system, social infrastructure, whether that can then be pivoted to be used for different scenarios if that comes along. I hope that makes sense.
Let's take one more question up there, and then while they chew on the answer to your question, then we hear another question and see if we can.
Thanks. This is Caroline Dastra from British Red Cross. So one point I like that I think two of the panelists mentioned is to be really inclusive and accessible early warning system, you need to have like so many different layers, right? In terms of gender, languages, technology, and so on. And quite often what we see is that the donors or financing kind of puts all these metrics on projects or government to do all that, but then the budget is actually squeezed. So I think my question is like, I think, how do we actually take that to scale, given the current like financial situation that we have, that early warning systems can be inclusive, involving all these different categories, not just women, but also, different languages, disabilities, and so on, and covering all the different communication channels and technologies to reach people, and like, where does the responsibility then lie on that?
I'll steal this for a second so those online can hear what I say as well. So we got two questions. I see some note taking here in the room. Ana Maria, do you have a view on any of these questions? I can't see if you're taking notes, but just since you're online, I wanted to give you the opportunity if you'd like to address any of these two questions.
Sure. I'll start with the first one. I think if I understood it correctly, it refers to the experience when the sort of like nature hazard early warning system got expanded to other type of hazards and how it's done. So actually it is happening in a lot of parts, a lot of countries and some regional setups, when there is a transformation happening from just kind of like focused natural hazard early warning system to multi-hazard, which would include air, health, agriculture sometimes. So it's one of the examples, again, is the Caribbean. I'm sorry, I'm really focusing on the Caribbean today, but there, so the regional institutions such as a Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, together with CMO, have expanded their warning platform to CARFA, which is Caribbean Public Health Agency. So they are issuing warnings and they're monitoring situation from a various type of hazards, for the nature hazards the public health risk associated with hurricanes or any other type of disasters, and they both give guidance to the disaster preparedness agencies. So this is one example. I think similar is happening in the South Asia, but I probably would need more information and more homework to do to report on that. But this is a problem that is happening. Pandemic was a huge push for that, because the same principles and same tools that would apply for floods at some point became applicable to informing the public of how to act in case of pandemic, especially in the early days when there was not that much information on the nature of the event. On the second question, I mean, it's $1 million question. How do you prioritize? How do you make sure that all of the layers are included? It's not difficult. I mean, it's very difficult. It's not easy to kind of give the exact answer. It depends a lot on the level of the dialogue with the government that you have in a country. It depends a lot on their kind of how risk averse they are normally. And I'm sad to say, but governments do tend to prioritize things that can be relatively quickly procured, installed, and demonstrated. So that unfortunately does not always lead us to the improvement of the quality of the forecast or improvement of the quality of the early warning system as such. Explaining, advocating, creating as many occasions for the vulnerable group representatives to participate in the decision-making processes is something that we can try to push and expand a little bit more. I think that doesn't fully answer the question. I understand that, but I will hope other panelist members would continue. Thank you.
Thanks, Masha. Rahel, you look like you would like to address one of the questions, or both.
Yeah, I'll try and address Caroline's question, knowing that it is a very, very difficult one about how to bring it to scale. And I did mention before that it is very time intensive and it does take a lot of resources, and there's not always the space to do that. But that's why it's so important to make sure that you're working with a wide range of actors, and this is when you can really use the projects that you've already done or have been implemented to try and leverage further funding from other sources like the private sector and others. So just looking at time, I will probably just keep it there, but I know that's not a very full answer, but hopefully that gives an idea.
Let's take a question over here.
I think there was one.
Hi, I'm Penel Ibe, an incoming master's student at IRDR, and my question is around countries that do not have centralized emergency response systems like 911, 111, and the likes. How do you incorporate the learnings you have from building these localized early warning systems, especially around inclusivity, into plans or efforts to build out emergency responses? Because it's one thing to start out, and then when there is an emergency or an extreme event, who do they then call? And so how do you sort of contribute some sort of qualitative data into those efforts?
Thank you. I'm Kanza Ahmed. I'm a global public health consultant and epidemiologist at the UK Health Security Agency. I found this conversation quite fascinating, and it made me reflect on some of the work that we're doing at the UK Health Security Agency when it comes to decolonising global health. And one thing that I found interesting that was missing from this conversation is around the impact of colonization and leadership. And it's not enough just to say, oh, we should engage with communities. Those people need to be leading. They need to be making those decisions. They need to be advising, supporting. But yet there is still that disconnect between sort of who actually leads or funds compared to who actually then has the impact. So I was wondering very, very quickly, because I'm running out of time, how you think we can engage, promote, support a diverse range of people to become leaders in the field of developing early warning systems, hence then in turn making a more inclusive approach.
Another two complicated questions. Any volunteers to take on the question on the what do we do in countries that don't have unified systems? With my experience is almost everywhere I work as the World Banker. John?
No, I mean, I don't have a good answer, except that there's a number of countries where we are working, where we're looking to put a centralized number in place, which is, and I know your question was how do they manage it without having a centralized number in place, and not difficultly. So I think the solution in those countries is we help them through the process, the consultations to centralize decentralize all the emergency response levels. And I'm not aware of a good alternate solution or how they're supposed to work like that.
Anyone wish to address the other question about the, well, I suppose decolonizing development aid? Small question.
Yeah, I can try. I really appreciate your comment, and it's bang on, and the very important issue of why it happens and why social inequalities exist, right? So I think what you were saying, a lot of the early warning systems and women's organizations that we work with in the Pacific, there's a couple that I have in mind. They're women-led, and they actually started because the women were not covered by tsunami warnings, and they started it themselves. And what we're doing is not come in and say like, oh, you have to do this and you're doing it wrong. It's like, what we want is to support them and elevate them and bring their work out, and kind of link to your question, how we link those small efforts that are happening, how we link them together, and how we elevate them, and how we bring those efforts into the awareness at a national level, at a regional level, at an international level, and then how we can address and listen to those needs and like what they asks are, and really how we are at their disposal on how when we support them. That is why UNWomen supports works with women's organizations. That's why we try to keep our work mostly focused on that involvement and not just coming in with a top-down approach in that sense.
I think on that note, we will end the session. We are at 3 o'clock. I want to thank our 4 panelists and certainly our presenter, Dr. Fearnley, as well. Maybe a brief hand would be in order. And the team from UCL more broadly for, of course, hosting us and setting up this whole conference, and for being a partner with us in this particular line of work. I learned a lot. I'm moving away with more questions than answers, which is not surprising in this line of work. I do hope that most of you have taken something useful away as well. I will put those postcards on this table in about 30 seconds. So any of you who want to look into the report that Bernie was talking about, can go and take a picture of the QR code and get hold of the report virtually. But thank you very much to all of you for joining, for the questions, for the engagement. Have a lovely afternoon, and thanks to everyone online. And we are now going to see what we all talked about. 1 second. Here it is. This is our conversation.
Right. Just do this. Thank you. Right. So just for a second to see this like a whole overview. I've tried to collect the different parts in different colors so you can distinguish them. So in the very beginning, there was this video on the projects in Niger. Then the talk by Carina Fearnley on many different things, but some of these are inclusivity, how you can include sex, gender, language, religion, precarity, and many other things for a more people-centered approach. Then some creative projects that you mentioned, how important the local context actually is, and then the importance of empowerment to engage actually these communities, which are then like at the center of these warnings. And then I've added some of the points from this discussion. I'm going to zoom into some of these. It was said many times to include the vulnerable, or like the not mentioned as much in this decision making, and not only as an afterthought. Then to make sure that there are enough resources for all these agents to be actually involved. I'm just going to zoom over here. The funding, sometimes there's a difference in what is actually being funded, and it might not always go to awareness, even if it's direly needed. And then the question on how to measure the success, like who takes part in trainings, how much money is spent, but also the notion that what works in one environment it might not work in another one. And then I've added here, this is not really done yet, but the decolonizing global health, or like the global initiatives, by linking them and combining all the things, the empowerment that's already happening on a local level.